Hey guys and girls, welcome to this week's episode of the B.Invested Birchy podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Birch, and this is the show unraveling the truth to the side of the 21st century. We're now exiting the matrix and waking up to motherfucking reality. This is week 2 of our special 3-part series on what's happening out there in the world. And my topic name for this week is, are we on the brink of a currency collapse? What is a currency collapse? What does it look like? Let's walk through. What I think I might do is I've got some notes here that I want to share, but I've also got loads of paper. And when people see me with paper, some people go, wow, this is going to be fun. So get your popcorn and let's hop in. So I've got a Twitter post here. It says the real reason US is invading Venezuela goes back to the deal Henry Kissinger made in Saudi Arabia in 1974. I'm going to explain why this actually is survival of the US dollar itself. Not drugs, not terrorism, not democracy. And it's got some link to a guy that's shared something on Twitter. But the collapse that we're seeing happening at the moment, a collapse just doesn't happen overnight. It's like anything that's ever gone wrong in life. Have you ever seen, I don't know, whether it's a person that's got a marriage breakdown or a business that's folded up, or whenever there's an event that's very bad and horrific, it wasn't just that one day that everyone woke up and the sun stopped shining and the music stopped. It's that there was a lot of telltale signs that were there beforehand, just like an abusive relationship could be, that there was going to be a big problem in the future. And there's a lot of telltale signs out there as we look around globally. So what does a currency collapse look like? It's happened. There's been over 10,000 currencies. There's a guy online, he just retired actually. His name's Mike Maloney from goldsilver.com. He's got a series on there called The Hidden Secrets of Wealth. It could be a good video series for you guys to watch or listen to if you haven't already. But you know, he goes into a lot about other currencies that are collapsing. There's literally, in the last 1,000 years, the first happened in 1022, I believe, in China, the first hyperinflation that occurred and currency collapse. And it's actually happened thousands of times, all the way from, the Roman empires where they diluted all their currency down to become worthless. And it's happening today. So I saw this chart, this one here, I'll get the editor to throw it up on the screen, is the $1. So this goes to show, as of the 6th of January, I think it was, in Iran, the catastrophe that's happened there over war, over oil, it's thuggery. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the politics of it. $1. So you could have had let's say you had $1 million in the bank, right? Let's say you had $1 million in the bank on, let's look at the chart. Let's say it was $1 for dollar, which it wasn't. It was about, 700 Rial beforehand, from my understanding. If you're from Iran, don't go me for butchering up your currency, right? I'm with you guys. If you had $1 million in the bank, it would have been devalued to $1, right? Literally to $1, right? $1 as of whatever date I screenshotted this, like the 9th of January, $1 in US was 1 million Iranian Rial. So that could have been like $1 million. That could have been like imagine what it would look like if your $1 million today in the bank turned to $1, right? What would chaos would be? And interestingly, they turned off the internet. They turned off the power, right? So people couldn't report what they were doing over there, right? And you go, well, this is, some country that's not my country. It's never going to happen here. Things wouldn't have thought that 50 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. If anyone would have predicted what happened back in 1971 when the petrodollar occurred, start seeing a line of who's trying to invade who. But anyway, so on the 9th of January, $1 was 994,055 Iranian Rial. As of today, because, I don't know, Trump made a Twitter post and said we're all friends again, $1 is 1,200 Iranian Rial. So that means it's gone back. So, if you had $1 million beforehand and went to $1, Now, to the power of 1,200, your 1,200 Rial is much better to the power of thousands. But you'd still only have, I don't know, $100 or something. Yeah? So they've just etching zeros, and that's bouncing around like you can literally see from a month. That's what the difference of the month means. And then some Iranian friends that are sending, don't ask me to read what the Arabic writing or whatever the writing says there. We can clearly see here where it's still showing that $1 is 1,153,766. So this data, wherever it's coming from, is all different. This one here, $1 is 158,100. So it's changing quite regularly. Right? There's been notable ones in our lifetimes and in our grandparents or people that could be close to us lifetime. We've had Zimbabwe, we've had Venezuela. The worst one, I've done videos on this beforehand, was the Hungarian pengo back in the 1940s. And probably the most notable one in history in the last 100 years would have been the hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic. I'm going to read through just a little bit about what happened in Weimar, Germany, and what things could have looked like there. It's reported, and I remember Robert Kiyosaki and Mike Maloney talking about this in 2007. The video has been deleted, but it said that you could have retired with 50,000 mark in your bank account in like 1920. You could have had that. And then in 3 years' time, they closed your bank account. I didn't send you a letter because the postage stamp was worth more than 50,000 mark. Just like what we've seen here in Iran this year, last month, happened overnight. Hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic was a 3-year period of hyperinflation in Germany, the Weimar Republic, between June 1921 and July 1924. Analysis. The hyperinflation episode in the Weimar Republic in the 1920s was not the first hyperinflation, nor was it the only one in the 1920s in Europe or even the extreme inflation of history, Hungarian pengo. Well, it's going to repeat what I said. John Maynard Keynes described the situation of the economic consequences of peace. The inflation of the currency system of Europe has proceeded to extraordinary lengths. The various belligerent governments unable to, or too timid or too short-sighted to secure from loans or taxes the resources they required, have printed notes for the balance. It was during this period of hyperinflation the French and British economic experts began to claim that Germany destroyed its economy with the purpose of avoiding reparations, but both governments had conflicting views on how to handle the situation. The French declared that Germany should keep paying reparations, while Britain sought to grant a moratorium that would allow for its financial reconstruction. Although the repatriations accounted for about 1/3 of German deficit from 1920 to 1923, the government found a convenient scapegoat. Anyway, this here, if you'd like to find out this document, it's a very long document. There's pages and pages with research and notes and reference points and lots of rabbit holes you could go down. Reach out to my team, and I'll have my team prepare all this on an email so they can shoot it over to you, right? So let's just read this. History. In order to pay back the large costs of World War I, Germany suspended the convertibility of its currency into gold when the war broke out. Unlike France, which imposed the first income tax to pay for the war, the German Kaiser and Parliament decided without opposition to fund the war entirely from borrowing, a decision criticized by financial experts. I can't even pronounce his name, even before the hyperinflation broke out. The result was that the exchange rate of the mark against the US dollar fell steadily throughout the war to 8.91 marks per dollar. The Treaty of Versailles over accelerated the decline in the value of the mark. So by the end of 1919, more than 47 paper marks were required to buy $1. It is sometimes argued that Germany had to inflate its currency to pay the war repatriations required under the Treaty of Versailles, but this is misleading because the Reparations Commission required payment to be in gold marks or in foreign currency, not the rapidly depreciating paper mark. Germany's currency was relatively stable at about 60 marks per US dollar during the first half of 1921 because the Western theatre of World War I was mostly France and Belgium. Germany had come out of the war with most of its industrial power intact, a healthy economy, and arguably a lot better position to once become a dominant force in European blah, blah, blah. And London ultimatum in 1921 demanded repatriation of gold or foreign currency be paid in annual installments of 2 billion gold marks plus 26% the value of Germany's exports. The first payment was to be made due on 1921. That was the beginning of increasingly rapid devaluation of the mark, which fell to less than 1/3 of the cent by November 1921, which was approximately 330 marks per US dollar. So you can see the value of the US dollar increasing against the marks. And if we look at everything around us, whether your property prices, whether it's commodities, whatever it is, we're seeing this roll out in real time in 2026. Hyperinflation, beginning of 1921, Germany began to buy foreign currency with marks at any price, but that only increased the speed of breakdown in the value of the mark. The lower the mark sank in international markets, the greater the amount of marks required to buy foreign currency demand by Reparations Commission. During the first half of 1922, the mark stabilized at about 320 marks per dollar. This was accompanied by international reparations. By 1923, it's got more stuff there. It says here, when the meetings produced no workable solution, inflation changed to hyperinflation and the mark fell to 8,000 marks per dollar by December 1922. So you can see it's like literally dying by the day and doubling and compounding. In January 1923, and it's important we talk about months here because that's when things really heat up, French and Belgian Jews occupied the industrial region of Germany in the Ruhr Valley to ensure that the reparations were paid in goods such as coal from Ruhr and industrial zones of Germany because the mark was practically worthless. Inflation was exacerbated when the workers of Ruhr went to the general strike. When the new currency, the Rentenmark, this is the stabilization that they had, replaced the worthless Reichsmarks on November 16th, 1923, 12 zeros were cut from the prices. Prices in the new currency remained stable. German people regarded this stable currency as a miracle, not only because they had heard such claims of stability before the note gold, the emergency money, that rapidly devalued as additional source of inflation. The usual explanation was that the Rentenmarks were used in a fixed amount and were backed by hard assets such as agricultural land, industrial assets. But what happened was more complex than that, as summarized in the following description. In 1923, Karl Hefferich proposed a plan to issue a new currency, a Rogenmark, backed by mortgage bonds indexed to market prices in paper marks of the rye grain. His plan was rejected because of the greatly fluctuating price of rye and paper marks. The Agriculture Minister Hans Luther proposed a different plan which substituted gold for rye and the new currency, the Rentenmark, backed by bonds indexed to market prices of gold. Gold bonds were defined by the rate of 2,790 gold marks per kilogram of gold, which was the same definition as pre-war gold marks. Rentenmarks were not redeemable in gold, but were only indexed as gold bonds. As this Rentenmark plan was adopted in monetary reforms, anyway, I go on to read a lot of this stuff. Let's have a look here. The revaluation. Eventually, some debts were reinstated to partially compensate those who had been creditors. A decree of 1925 reinstated some mortgages at 25% of face value in the new Reichsmark, effectively 25 billion times their value in the old marks. So if something cost $1, I don't know, a paddle pop. You can't even get a paddle pop. Paddle pop's $5, right? It would have been revalued $5 times 25 billion. So it'd be 125 billion marks for a paddle pop. Let's say a house with a garden, right? This is very interesting. And I'll talk about this on our next podcast as well. In 1913, a house with a garden. All right. So 1913, a house with a garden. Let's call it a little red brick house with a little garden out the front. Okay, would cost 28,000 marks or about 322 ounces of gold. Right. Throughout history, an ounce of gold would be worth about 10 ounces of silver, as an example, right? In 1923, a 50-kilo bag of flour would be worth 1 kilo of silver. So 322 ounces, that would be 10 kilos of gold. So it'd be worth like 100 kilos of silver. 50 kilos of flour was worth more in 10 years' time than a house with a garden. Right? I've said multiple times that in a hyperinflation scenario, you'd basically pay off a house with a Big Mac meal. Are we heading there? I've got a lot of stuff to compare it back to Australia, to compare it back to other parts of the world and what we're seeing at the moment. We've got here the hyperinflation winners. We'll chuck this up on the screen if you're watching it. If you're listening to it, it'd be good to watch it for a different experience. Hyperinflation winners, I'm just reading it out here. Borrowers such as businessmen, landowners, and those with mortgages found that they were able to pay back their loans easy with worthless money. It's the first time I've read that. I'm clapping because that's what I've been saying for a decade. People on wages were relatively safe because they renegotiated their wages every day. They renegotiate their wages every day. However, even their wages eventually failed to keep up with the prices. So there'd be like a shop, like you go to a coffee shop, and every 5 minutes the waitress would put up a sign and say, hey, the coffee's gone up now. It's doubled. Literally every hour they were going up. Every day staff were having to renegotiate their wages. Farmers coped well since their products remained in demand and they received more money for them as prices spiraled. So that's the importance of having assets, having commodities, having different vehicles apart from having a job. The hyperinflation losers, people on fixed income, students, pensioners, sick, anything from the government. You got the settling, whatever, it's not going to keep up. They say the CPI is only 3.8%. Last episode, I talked about the interest rates going up because we've got inflation and they're saying inflation's at 3.8%. When you've got inflation in the real world going up 100% per day or 100% every hour, your pension ain't going to help you. Yeah. So you need to build income streams. That's the solution that I talk about. People with savings and those that had lent money, for example, to the government, were most badly hit as their money became worthless. So that's why I always talk about the debt becomes irrelevant with inflation. The debt becomes worthless with inflation. And my view is if we do see a hyperinflation, I'm not saying we're going to see hyperinflation, although I've got shitloads of evidence to show that we are in 1918, for example, in Germany right now, globally. Beforehand, it was a German problem. Beforehand, it was a Zimbabwe problem. Beforehand, it was a Venezuelan problem. This time, it is a global problem because the US dollar is based on nothing, really. But it's the base currency of the world with the Brink and Wood system that we have. That they came off and we've gone on to the petrodollar. The US dollar is the base currency. So for you to trade oil, for you to trade any commodities, you have to convert to US dollars, which then puts strength in the US economy and the US dollar, and then you can buy your products in US dollars. So it's going to be a very interesting time. This will be a US problem. I don't believe it'll be a global problem, but there'll be shrapnel. Right? You throw a hand grenade somewhere, kaboom, right? Yeah, you blow up the person that's there, but when all the bits of metal come in, you've got in your eye, your arm, your leg, you're injured, you're still going to survive, but that's where we could be right now. That's the collapse that we're seeing out there. When we back this up and look at some events that are occurring weekly, daily, the start of the year, I'm going to get onto them a bit more in the next episode. However, and there's a lot of things that I need to talk about in this episode still. We're seeing that China is buying commodities from around the world. We've seen that things are getting re-indexed as critical minerals, such as silver. Right? You've always thought gold, but what about silver? Soon it'll probably be copper that'll be heading into a critical mineral state. And the reality of it is if that occurs, then, these things are going up further and further in value. But if China, Russia, there's some countries out there that have been, accused of things, if they've been buying precious metals like these for the last decade, every time that, I don't know, silver goes up $1, doesn't mean, okay, you got 1 ounce of silver, you're making $1. If you've got 1 billion ounces of silver, you got $1 billion. You got 1 trillion ounces of silver, you're making $1 trillion. If it goes up by $10, you got 1 trillion times 10, you've got $10 trillion. It goes up by $100, you got $100 trillion. So this is a power shift around the world. And when you look at places like Venezuela, I'm not going geopolitical. I'm not, there's talks of certain people or individuals or governments seizing countries for drugs or war or whatever. You think, okay, well, what resources do these countries have and how critical are they to the survival of the currency that they've made out of thin air? That's the important thing to be questioning right now as the world is asleep. They're starting to wake up because you're like, hey, I can't afford things and I'm in a lot of trouble and it's hard to live and whatnot. But inflation's going to get way out of control, in my view. It already is, but it's going to get a lot worse. This is nothing yet. So, when we go back to who the winners are and who the losers are, I'll get the editor to throw it up on the screen so we can see. So just remember, have assets. It doesn't mean you have to go and buy 50 properties to survive. But if you got 50 properties at 200 grand a piece, you got 10 mil worth of debt. But if the average wage goes from 50 grand to 100 grand to $1 million to $10 million to $20 million to $100 million to $1 billion to $1 trillion, you might think that sounds rich. I'd love $1 billion a year or a week in wage. But when a Big Mac meal costs you, $100 million for a Big Mac, that's when shit gets out of whack. But when you've got the debt, which is fixed, it's easy to repay that debt. So that's why I'm so excited by this. So the stages of this, and I want to compare to Australia as to what stage we're in at the moment compared to the world. It's not all doom and gloom. I'm excited, right? It might sound like I'm like, oh, watch out, everyone, dig a bunker and, hide from the world and get in a caravan and sail into the sunset. It's not. It's being aware to it because it's out there. It's happening. Everyone thinks that their property's gone up because there's some, miracle worker and that they can suddenly walk on water because they decided to buy some shitbox property in Western Sydney and it's gone up. Is it the property that's good or is it your currency that's failing you? That's the question. So stage 1 of a currency collapse is debt accumulation. So if we look at the country here in Australia, and these are some stats I'm going to be reading, Australia's household debt is very high. It's 113% of GDP in mid-2025. The drivers of that are the mortgages, I don't like using the word, but the corona period, like the illness time, the lockdowns and that, spending, infrastructure, high public sector spending. Did you know that about over 60% of the Australian population is getting paid from the government, right? I don't know, maybe 20% of them are on the dole, whatever. They say, they say that we're at 4% unemployment, so there's like 4% on the dole, but they don't class students as that, so you get all the student allowances, right? And then they don't say for the retirees, they're past their work period, so they're off the balance sheet, so the pensioners are off there for them to keep the numbers down nice and low. But then you've got all the government workers, all the government agencies, then the people that are getting paid from the government, I don't know, NBIS, the consulting company that's building a bridge to go through a new neighborhood for a new bit of infrastructure because there's all these new people coming in, right? The amount of spending that's coming from the government is so full of debt. And it says here the government debt is 43 to 44% of GDP, which is pretty stable compared to a lot of the countries. So we're not that bad. We're not faring as, a red alert, but our currency is pegged to the US dollar, and that is on red alert. The US economy is almost in $40 trillion worth of debt. At the start of this century, right, which is only 26 years ago, the debt was about $1 trillion, the size of Australia, right? So in 20 odd years, it's gone up 40 times. The interest debt, right, let's take $40 trillion at a 5% interest rate, That's $2 trillion a year in interest. Right? That's unsustainable. The US is now paying double what Australia's total debt is. Will we get there? I'm confident. Will it be tomorrow? Who knows? Stage 2, the monetisation of that debt. So during the corona timeframe, the lockdown timeframe, I've never said the word with the numbers on the end of it. The RBA supported bond buyback. So it's like they're printing their money and they're buying it back. And they go, oh, we just bought it back, right? So we're looking at quantitative easing, right? And it started in the US, right? That's what I find funny. Just going off last week's episode talking about the interest rates and them rising here in the country. The funny thing is that in the last 2 months in the US, something has given way in the bank. And they've got this thing called the repo market, which is repurchasing agreements, because some banks are in trouble in the US right this minute, right? And they don't publish which bank or whatever, but they create this thing called the repo market, which is repurchasing agreements, which are short-term lending bonds. And they start buying them up to the tunes of $10 billion a day, $20 billion a day, $50 billion a day. And the same thing happened back in September of 2019, just before the illness happened in the start of 2020. So very interesting, right? There is quantitative easing happening out there globally, but it hasn't been branded at that. So whenever we see something happening for, say, the US, it generally happens 3 to 6 months later in Australia or other US-related, governments. QE-style stimulus packages, whether it be your job keeper, job seeker, whatever incentive they were, when those things start coming out, we've got a shit ton of them. What happens with that is that the liquidity expands, interest rates come lower, it's more affordable to cover that debt. But after the party, it's like a hangover, right? You have all these drinks, right? You're having the drinks. Sometimes I think what the people that are only listening to me see when they don't see me making all the hand gestures here. Sorry, but I was pretending to drink, right? Because it's like a big party, and the drug of choice for the government is printing cheap credit. The world is hooked on it, but when the hangover happens, it's where we're at the moment, and they can't stop it, right? So the next phase would be heading back into more QE, which we will see surely, in my view, contrary to other people's thoughts, but it's all there in data and it's happened throughout history. I guess the difference between the QE style through the Corona era to now is that the US printed money directly, and Australia bought bonds through the bond market, which affected liquidity into the markets. Same effect, but a bit different. Lower borrowing costs gave people more confidence to go out there and buy more stuff, but inflation has not stopped. They're not able to stop inflation. They're pushing interest rates as hard as they can. They keep pushing them up, doing their thing, but it's not working. In times gone by, it has, but there's an awakening. And the next episode, I'm only talking about lots of interesting things. It's the big finale, like the shows all the dots connecting in it, right? I'm going to use silver as an example, right? The silver price has gone up a lot over the last few months. It's crashed a couple of times. Silver price hit $170 Aussie the other day. It crashed to about $120 Aussie. It's triple what it was 2 years ago, still after the crash. But the paper market shows that it's only worth $120, but every shop doesn't have silver. No one can get access to it. It's just a paper market. But the people that are selling it, it hasn't crashed, right? The reason why it hasn't crashed, people online, on forums, whatever you go and see, they're like, hey, who wants to buy a 1 ounce silver kookaburra coin or whatever they're selling? And they go, yeah, cool. And you see him sell it within 10, 20 minutes, right? I just find it interesting, right? So even though the price technically has crashed in silver, people don't care. They're buying because they see a greater value, because their affiliation with money is that money is worthless. So if we're looking at a property perspective, people are like, okay, yeah, interest rates have gone up. It's going to cost a bit more, but doesn't matter. There's no other good investment. These things just keep going up in value. And that's what we're seeing happening in real time, which is causing a greater level of inflation and greater pressure to the system, which is a few stages before that blow off top. So if you look at stage 3, inflation, areas that were hit the hardest have been groceries, rents, energy, everything, salaries, business costs, whatever. The Aussie dollar has weakened, but where will that go? Obviously, if the US, the impact of us putting up our interest rate, that's something I forgot to mention last week on the previous episode. I'm filming them the same day, but they're released on 2 different days. Is that one thing that we will most likely see with the interest rates going up is that the Aussie dollar rises compared to the US dollar, right, making it weaker. And it's interesting because as you try to steer this shit this way, if you go too far, it'll have a greater ramification over there, whether it be that imports, when we go to buy stuff from overseas, will become too expensive or too cheap, depending on how strong or weak the Aussie dollar goes. Obviously, the Aussie dollar becoming weaker, imported goods become more expensive. If it goes up, imported goods become more cheaper. So it's a good thing. Interest rates go up, we can buy things cheaper from overseas. So interesting. Inflation reduces the cash value. Obviously, the cash becomes worthless, and that's erosion of your currency. To the next episode that I'm going to be doing, I'll be talking about how far the currency has really been eroded over the course of the last 50, 60 years. Next stage is loss of confidence. We start going into a downward deflationary cycle, and then there could be a collapse. But to fix the collapse, they always come in and inject liquidity. Just like in Weimar, Germany, they inject the liquidity in, but then it takes us back to the start of this cycle, which becomes a more perpetual cycle, and the inflation just goes higher and higher into oblivion. So there's definitely, I'm not trying to sound negative. I'm actually doing this podcast because I'm so excited to see that we can be alive in this period of time and the opportunities that are in front of us, because it's not something that happens every day of the week that you can go and buy something and it doubles, triples, quadruples within a day, a week, a month, a year, or whatever. But the collapse of the currency allows for opportunities like this to be had. And as I said beforehand, if I'm got some Iranian viewers, they'll probably be like, Birchy's onto this, right? It's not just one nation. It's happened throughout different nations, throughout history, throughout millennium. When will our time be? I don't know. But it looks like we're starting to approach this period, and there's ways that you can protect yourself. There's ways that you can, take advantage of the situation. And I'm just blessed that I've got the thought, the foresight, the research, the data, and the excitement to go, okay, this has happened beforehand. How can we prepare? It's like the dude that goes, hey, the storm's coming. Let's insure the cars. Let's insure the house and make sure that if it all gets screwed up, then, hey, we're going to turn out a lot better because we'll get the insurance and we're going to bring you, life built. The ability is there if you have the foresight, the knowledge, the research, and that's all I'm trying to share with you guys. So have discernment, seek, answers and keep researching. So thanks for watching. I'm going to leave it at that. And I'm excited to share with you the finale of what I discovered. And this video has taken me 6 to 8 weeks to really think about this next one. I'm excited to share with you. Make sure you share, like, subscribe, and follow us next week, every week, Thursdays on Google Play, Apple Play, Spotify, and YouTube. Catch up soon. Bye for now.
Like Bilal said, man, we're stuck in the matrix. This my advice, don't care if you take it. The dollar back to die, soon to be hyperinflated.